And now Congressman Matt Gaetz is stepping in. He wrote Ray a letter questioning the role of federal undercover agents in the attack. And he joins me now with more. Representing Florida's 1st Congressional District, Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Congress, what do you make of this? Parler and some of the other social media apps, they sent information to the FBI about posts that they were concerned about several days in advance. And then even a few months back, we heard that NYPD, local police in Washington, D.C., that they knew that there was something possibly that was going to happen on January 6th like it did, and then they did nothing. But yet no one wants to get to the bottom of this. This is the huge narrative. Media talks about it every single day. We've heard some people even compare the January 6th Capitol riot to 9/11, which is a ridiculous comparison. That being said, why doesn't anyone want to get to the bottom of this?
So there are two principal questions, Steph. The first is whether or not the FBI missed critical information provided by Parler or local law enforcement that could have thwarted the attack. But I think there's an even more serious question. It was recently raised in fantastic reporting at Revolver News, and there it's posed whether or not the FBI had a direct role through their operatives or assets in the actual escalation of January 6th. Here's what we know, Stephanie. Groups like the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, 3 Percenters were infiltrated to some degree by the FBI. That doesn't necessarily mean badged agents were parts of those groups, but it does mean that people were providing information from those groups to the FBI. And if the very people who provided that information were accelerating the violence, were riling people up who might have otherwise just shown up on the Capitol lawn to peacefully protest and have their voice heard, well then I think the FBI is even more culpable in the violence and in the most troubling parts of 1/6. That's why I've sent a letter to Director Wray seeking a full accounting of the FBI assets, the FBI operatives, and even potentially the FBI agents that might have known what was going on and even might have participated in some of the worst elements of January 6th.
So, Congressman, we're certain that the FBI did infiltrate these groups that you had just said, like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and some of the others. And then what you're also saying now, according to these reports that we read from Revolver, is that the FBI undercover agents may have had more to do with this. It wasn't just infiltrating and gathering intel, that there could have been a possibility that they were like instigating and encouraging people to do things that maybe they wouldn't have done.
That's absolutely right. And one of the strongest pieces of evidence that that may have occurred is that the very person who utilized this strategy of embedding people into an organization and then accelerating their criminal conduct comes out of Michigan, where the attempted harm to Governor Whitmer was discovered. He then goes from Michigan to the head office in Washington, D.C. And what I'm concerned about is that you've got people in jail right now who may have engaged in criminal trespass or some other minor offense, and the people who actually encouraged the criminal conduct might have been absolved of any culpability or any consequence because they were providing information to the FBI. But if that's true, they weren't providing the right information. They were merely using the FBI, and the FBI missed it, and that's why I expect answers from Director Wray on these questions by the beginning of August.
Yeah. Do you think you'll actually get a response?
Well, I don't always get responses from the FBI, but I do think that in this case, there is such an acuity, there's such a severity. I mean, imagine how searing it would be for our country if we found out that our own government had assets and informants that were fomenting violence. That would really reframe January 6th. Right now, it is largely being used as a blood libel against the MAGA movement, when in reality, you could have the deep state more involved in the January 6th violence than people who showed up to peacefully protest and to show their support for President Trump.
Yeah, and I will say, Congressman, I know that there's going to be folks who see this interview and they're going to be really mad and they're like, oh, conspiracy theorists, they're pushing a wild conspiracy theorist. These are the same people who pushed the Russia collusion hoax for years and still continue to push it, by the way. And also, they're the ones who called us, all of us who were questioning whether or not the coronavirus was a lab leak from the Wuhan lab. We were all written off as conspiracy theorists for having those questions, and then turns out, oh, well, maybe we were onto something. So I'm going to just put that out there now, because I already know all of these liberals that watch the show, they want something to complain about. We're just asking questions, and there's a lot of mystery in regards to this. And I will say, too, what I'm really bothered by is the treatment of these folks who participated in the Capitol riot. Look, I'm not for people committing crimes. They shouldn't have stormed inside the Capitol. I'm totally against that. I'm for people peacefully protesting. That being said, they've been completely treated differently by the law than those who participated in the Black Lives Matter riots, the billions of dollars in destructions, the over 20 lives lost during the Summer of Loves and during all of these riots, by the way, mostly minorities. All those people got like a slap on the wrist. They're not sitting in jail, rotting behind bars without bond. I just talked about on this show yesterday about some Netflix star who was a Trump supporter. He participated in the rally. He didn't. It sounds like he didn't storm the Capitol. He had the FBI show up at his house, 20 agents, like kicked down his door at 6 in the morning. They ended up not arresting him. But why is it that they always have the FBI available to kick down the door if you're a Trump supporter or a Trump ally, but then if you're on the other side and Democrat, nothing happens to you? Are we living in a two-tier justice system?
The gravest threat to our republic is the utilization of these national security authorities against our own people. And you're totally right, Stephanie. We see that target the right in politics far more than it ever targets the left. Now, I know that wasn't always the case for the FBI. For example, around the FBI's founding, there was a lot of targeting of civil rights leaders. And now we see that turned on its head, where they're more targeting people who don't align with the new wokeism that seems to be taking over just about every aspect of our government. And you're right, whenever we get called conspiracy theorists, it usually means we're over the target. And I wish these things weren't true. I wish they hadn't done the Russia hoax. I wish the FBI hadn't totally blown the call on the Wuhan Institute of Virology when a defector, Dr. Reframing Jan, showed up and said that this was something that was created by the Chinese military. And I certainly hope that the FBI didn't have a very strong role in encouraging people to violate federal law through their informants and assets on January 6th. But time and again, when we ask these questions, we start to see that the FBI is really less of an organization to investigate crimes, and they're more here to investigate people and movements. And you know what? That's what the FBI has kind of always been. Very dark days that we're continuing to see, and it shows that there's still a lot of swamp left to be drained over there at that entity.
Absolutely. You know, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. Obviously, we're thankful to many of those hardworking men and women in the FBI, but obviously there's something going on here, and those involved in the Russia collusion hoax and so on. Like, those are the people we're calling out, not like everyone else who's honest. That being said, you know,
Fair point.
And back to the coronavirus too, at the G7 summit, all of these world leaders are like, we got to get to the bottom of it. Like, a year and a half later, we're going to get to the bottom of it. Like, the Wuhan lab had a lot of time, the Chinese government had a lot of time to clean up any evidence that could be left behind, get rid of their witnesses, and so on. So it's just such a joke now. You know, these world leaders are taking a tough stance, and they're going to get to the bottom of it and hold China accountable. They should have done that a year ago. I mean, they should do it now, but like, it's kind of a joke, isn't it?
Well, and we know that evidence atrophies over time. There are two big cover-ups in our modern moment in history: the cover-up of election fraud, which happened and is real and should still drive inquiry from the Congress, and the cover-up of the origins of the Wuhan virus. And obviously, the evidence now points to safety standards that weren't complied with, an effort by the World Health Organization in China to cover up the virus, and even the attempt from the Chinese Communist Party to pass on a fake genome in the early stages of the virus so that its true origins connected to the Chinese military could not be examined, uncovered, and demonstrated to the world. If we allow institutions like the World Health Organization, or even institutions in our own country, to reshape the nature of truth and to cover up these misdeeds, then I fear we will no longer have confidence within the public that they are being governed with respect to their wishes. We have to get to the bottom of what happened in Wuhan, and it's my expectation that that is a lot harder for the reason you just identified, and that was the graciousness that was provided to China, specifically by the World Health Organization.
Yeah, and then if you take even just the whole origins of the virus out of this conversation, China still hasn't been held accountable for not being transparent at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, that could have saved a lot of lives, and they didn't share the information when they knew it and when they had it. And I mean, that's a really terrible thing. Anyways, Congressman, we're totally out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephanie. Look forward to being with you next week, hopefully.
Yes.